I'm excited to join you today in this short video about priority standards. Kim, Marshall, and I have talked quite a bit about what we'd like to share with you regarding how to recognize a priority standard, how we use priority standards, and really how they inform our instruction. So without further ado, Kim and I will get started, and I will attempt to screen share with you, right, Miss Marshall?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's see what I can do. Are we good?
We're good.
So first thing I kind of wanted to point out was how we might think about the work that we have to do around our priority standards and how we create those decisions regarding those standards and why they're important. So kind of landed on this paragraph that we'd like to share with you, and it's in the module and we'll refer to it more than once, but even though our standards are targeted, there are way too many standards to learn in a school year. And I'm sure you've experienced that as a teacher when you're trying to figure out what to focus on. And we often talk about standards as I have to cover these standards instead of what do we really need to teach? What's the most important? So I know at the risk of reading to you, I'm going to go ahead and go through this little paragraph. And I have color coded the paragraph a little bit too. And if you look at the bottom of this screen, the green parts match up with our PLC connection. Those are the parts about what do we want students to know and be able to do. The blue lettering is really about how will we know if they know it, what we've identified. And then the gold lettering is what do we do if they don't. There's construction in the background. So although they are more targeted, the state standards are far too many to learn in a school year. Teams, meaning our PLCs, must collaborate to determine which of the standards are essential, that's a really key word, from those that are nice to know or peripheral. Essential standards do not represent everything that teachers teach. They represent the minimum a student must learn to reach high levels of learning. And I would translate that as that's the minimum target. So the standards represent the target. They serve to establish the focus for assessing student learning. There's that how will we know if we know it, and implementing interventions when students do not learn. That's the part of what do we do if they don't know it. Teachers aren't creating a list, but building shared knowledge of what the most important skills, concepts, and understandings are that will result in higher levels of achievement. This is about focus, focus, focus. And that's the hard part. We generally are looking at a wide spectrum. And this is about narrowing in on the things that are absolutely the most important. At this point, I'd like to stop sharing my screen and Kim will take over for a while and talk a little bit about the criteria for identifying a priority standard. You're on, Kim.
All right. Grab this. Okay. So can you see the module, Deb?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what I want to do now is move us over a little bit. And I'm going to look at just the first part of this module. And so what Deb kind of talked about is on this why priority standards. So you're going to see that quote again that she went through. So you guys will have that. You don't have to, refer back to the recording to read it. You can actually read it on this page. And then we also included a slideshow or a portion of a slideshow that the Indiana Department of Education actually did about unpacking and prioritizing standards, which is definitely worth kind of a click through. And it definitely relates to what we're doing right now. So I would definitely check that out. So what I'm going to talk about are these 4 criteria: readiness, endurance, accountability, and leverage. So when you're looking at your standard, so I'm going to take the first standard in my list and I'm going to ask myself these questions. So with readiness, does it prepare the student for success at the next level? Is it something that they have to have in order to go to that next grade level? Is it a prerequisite skill? Does it have endurance? Do they have to have that knowledge beyond the unit or course? So that's kind of when you see one of your standards come up more than once throughout the year. So this standard applies to a unit at the beginning of the year, but also in the middle of the year and also at the end of the year. So it has that endurance. Accountability is, does the standard help prepare a student for a high stakes external exam? In this case, we're probably talking about iLearn. Is it a concept or a skill that they're going to encounter on a state exam or a college exam like PSATs or SATs? To kind of evaluate that knowledge. And Deb's going to talk a little bit more about that when we go through the blueprints, because even if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not an iLearn tested subject, you definitely still have some really important information in your standards that relates back to math and ELA. So we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Does the standard have leverage? So will they be able to apply that standard in more subject area, in more than one subject area? And the answer is, for most of these, if it's a priority standard, yes, it will. And you're going to see that also when Deb goes through the blueprint. So as you're looking at your high priority standards, you know that these are things that are always assessed, right? So this is probably going to be 10 to 12 standard. It's not going to be a huge giant number. And it's going to be about 80 to 85% of that instructional time. These are your got to knows. So that's your high level. Your medium and lows, they fall more under things that are going to be taught alongside a priority standard, or it falls under a priority standard. So it might be one of those like prerequisite skills or something like that that goes with a priority standard. And they're kind of your nice to knows, and are only addressed about 15 to 20% of the time. So as you go through this, whether you have a blueprint or not, you are going to notice that understanding this criteria is really going to help you understand why it's important and why something is a priority standard. You'll also see that you're going to need to look at some of the standards below and above grade level, because there is a lot of vertical articulation, especially when you're looking at the readiness criteria or the endurance criteria. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, all right, at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and switch back over to Deb, because she is going to show you the blueprints and how, whether you're math, science, ELA, or social studies, these blueprints are going to be very helpful to identifying your standards.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to share my screen at this point, and hopefully I can find the right screen to share. We talked about our quote a little bit, but I'd like to kind of move forward into that blueprint that Kim was mentioning. Some of you have seen this blueprint before, and you know that Indiana publishes a blueprint to tell us pretty much what to focus on throughout our teaching of a particular topic. The one I've got up here is for language arts. There are also blueprints for other subjects, but I kind of want to show how there's a real possibility for, in this case, for science and for social studies to influence and to be part of a high stakes testing piece, which is that accountability factor that Kim mentioned. So I want to talk a little bit about that and show you what's in this blueprint. So you can see that the blueprint has really been arranged to focus on what those high impact areas are. So for language arts, this key ideas and textual support and vocabulary is going to make up to 39% of the iLearn English Language Arts assessment. And then writing is going to make up a huge percent as well. So when we look at this, it tells us kind of the number of items that might be in that category. And it tells us also, right, the percentage of the test, as well as points out where you might see those test items being focused. So for instance, if it's reading literature in 7th grade, this kind of tells you the item range and the percentage that it might be of the test. what's so interesting about this is that even though this is a language arts high stakes test, iLearn, you can see we've got some literacy standards in here for social studies and science. So the history portion and the science portion are included in here. And I bring those up because I think sometimes we think that social studies and science aren't contributing to this high stakes testing environment, when really they're very specifically named in the blueprint. So I wanted to make sure that you had a look at this, and in the module you'll be able to click on these blueprints, right, Kim? And you can share them in your PLC. You can kind of check out to see where you should be pointing instruction, which should help you with identifying priority standards. If you take into account all the different factors that make it a priority standard, just one of them is the accountability piece, but it is a very important part of what our school accomplishment as far as a school grade, as far as the kinds of assistance that we might give students. It is an important part of what we do. And quite honestly, I think the iLearn exams are really good preparation for the SAT, for the ACT, and other kinds of college level pieces that our juniors and seniors will need to be able to accomplish to graduate. So that's all changing in the future, by the way. The new exit exam for high schoolers will be the SAT going into the future. So in order to give you a closer look, I think as an example, I'm going to show you the literacy standards in history and in science technology. So I'm going to pop onto this next piece. This is the explanation that is provided by the DOE around the literacy standards, in this case, in history and social studies. It talks about discipline-specific reading and writing skills. So that means reading like a historian, writing like a historian, or in the case of science, reading like a scientist, writing like a scientist. And then the second bullet, that there's 6 different elements of literacy that should be taught in history and social studies classes. Same thing for science. They're different based on the content area. There's key ideas and textual support, structural elements and organization. Then there's also synthesis and connection of ideas, writing genres, the writing process, and the research process. Who would have thought that that's what we were teaching in science and social studies as we teach our content? But you're really teaching these skills through the lens of science and social studies. And you're using science and social studies content to contribute to that blueprint. So let me back up a minute and just make sure when you look in here, these are not optional. These standards, priority standards, are a big part, if you keep going through this list, of what students will need in order to practice and be ready for the kinds of thinking skills, reading skills, and writing skills that are needed on that iLearn test. And then the third bullet down here, it says something very specific. These literacy standards are not designed for implementation in an English language arts class. They are guidance for content area teachers in grades 6 through 12, history and social studies teachers, science teachers, career and technical education teachers, CTE. So I thought that was an interesting bullet, and really it kind of goes with any content area, even if it's not specifically mentioned here. What are the things we can do through the lens of our content to make sure that our students are prepared for this level of reading, writing, and most importantly, thinking? So wanted to point that out. I thought it was a really nice explanation. And here's some examples. So when you think about this key ideas and textual support, and it even says reading for you. I'm going to turn my pointer on. It even talks about how this is a reading piece, but keep in mind This is a history social studies standard, even though it says reading up there. So if you look at grades 6 through 8, 4.1 integrate visual information, and it gives you examples, charts, graphs, photographs, videos, and maps, which I think you probably do. But integrate those with print and digital text. And what do you do with them if this is a reading piece? It tells you distinguish among fact, opinion, and reasoned judgment, and compare and contrast the same topic within a primary and secondary source document. So it's really leading you toward, this is a powerful standard. This is something that we should focus on in our content area classes. Here's another example. This is about writing. Again, there's my pointer. And look what this says, write arguments focused on discipline-specific content in social studies. Write informative text, including analyses of historical events. That's very specific. And the reason it's so specific is because that is what kids are going to see on that high stakes test. It's what they're going to experience as they move into high school after middle school. It's what they're going to do on those tests that get them ready for college and career. And if you have students that are going to be in dual credit, which you do, or in AP, or for select few IB, these are the kinds of things, the skills that those students need. So it's really our responsibility to use our content areas in this way. And to identify our priority standards, right? Which is what this module is about. Here's some examples in science. Cite specific text evidence to support analysis of science and technical texts. This is under key ideas and textual support as well. It's arranged a little differently. You'll note here the main topics and then the standards are here. Develop or determine the central ideas or conclusions of a text that's within science. Follow a multi-step procedure. Again, there might be a question on one of those high stakes tests where kids have to use several different documents to do what this says. And if you look down here, determining the meanings of symbols, key terms, and other domain-specific words and phrases as they're used in specific scientific and technical context. And then essentially what's going to happen as you do these standards, or some of these, whichever ones are your priority, you're going to notice that it all is going to lead to the writing piece as well. So we're writing arguments about science content. We're writing informative text about science content, about procedures or experiments. That could come within your lab work. But we are using those literacy skills not once in a while. We're integrating them throughout, which is what makes them a priority standard. Turn my pointer off. So, wanted to just kind of highlight how these standards, these very important standards, contribute to all those things that Kim mentioned. They contribute to readiness. Do these standards help get kids ready for success at the next level, beyond middle school in this case? Do they speak to endurance? Do we see the standard appearing over time, that they have to retain these skills and understanding? Is there an accountability factor to your priority standard? Yep, if this is going to be part of something that kids are going to do on a high stakes testing situation, then it's priority. And then of course, leverage. Can I use the skill in several different content areas? Can I leverage my ability to distinguish among facts or reasoned judgment based on research into another course that I'm taking, or into different things I'm going to experience in my academic career? So just wanted to give that little overview of this section of our priority standards. I'll turn it back over to Kim.
And I think it's important to note too that even though we looked at an ELA blueprint, if you had pulled up a math blueprint, you would see the same thing. So we just used ELA as an example, but you would still see that connection beyond math to science and social studies, and how you can relate those standards. So definitely check out both sets of blueprints, both ELA and math, if you're not one of the iLearn tested subjects. So I'm going to finish up by sharing. Sorry. I'm going to finish up by sharing the next step in the module is that you're going to get this kind of spreadsheet, which I'll open in a second, where you can actually list your standards, and then it has those 4 criteria, and you can check off whether or not it meets those things. So here's this spreadsheet. You'll be able to make a copy of it. So I would just list my standard here, you know, whatever it is. And then I can check off after reading through it, does it have readiness? Does it have endurance? Does it have accountability? Does it have leverage? Obviously, if you're checking 3 or 4 of the 4 boxes, it's probably a high priority standard. If you've only checked 1 of the boxes or 2 of the boxes, then it's probably a low or a medium priority. And I think that it's important, even if you are a subject that has a blueprint, to look through your standards and look through why it might have been chosen as a priority standard, to see whether it had all 3 or all 4 check boxes on there. So even though you have a blueprint, I think it's still important to understand why the state chose something to be a priority standard, or why it's being chosen on iLearn. And then for those of you that don't have the blueprint, obviously you're going to use this process to help you identify those priority standards. So that's in this here, and you can make a copy of that there. And that is your last piece of part 1 of the priority standards module.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Let us know if you have any questions.
Absolutely.